The Lumina Foundation, one of the largest in the nation, is focused on encouraging people to learn beyond high school. Dr. Courtney Brown with the foundation shares Lumina's values and its approach on the Midwest Flourish. Greetings, I'm Rick Farrant, and I'm your host for the Midwest Flourish. Our guest today is Dr. Courtney Brown, who is Vice President of Impact and Planning for the Lumina Foundation, which is an Indianapolis-based national philanthropic foundation with an endowment of $1.5 billion. Welcome, Courtney.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm really happy that you're here today because what Lumina does has such a tremendous impact on education and then ultimately the workforce and the economy, and it certainly has a really, really broad reach. So perhaps just to get us started, you can give a broad overview of what the Lumina Foundation does and what its generally what its goals are.
Sure. So, at the highest level, Lumen is focused on one big idea. We help more people get education and training beyond high school that actually leads to opportunity. And at Lumina, everything we do is centered around one big national goal. By 2040, we want 75% of adults in the US labor force to have a college degree or other high quality credential that leads to economic prosperity. So that's kind of at the highest level, that's what we're about.
Okay. And I was going to talk about that. You brought up the goal. I was going to talk about that later, but as long as you mentioned that goal, I think the other goal that you had before that one was you wanted 60% by 2025, if I have that correct, and you almost hit it according to your data. Is that correct? Did you almost hit it or did you hit it?
So you're right. So we for the last 15 years, we've been working on the attainment goal. So that is by 2025, 60% of Americans in the workforce would have a degree or credential. So that's been the goal we've been working on. To be honest with you, we're about 55% right now, but that's 2024 data. So there's a lag with the data. So we won't know for sure until next year. But regardless of whether we hit it or not, I mean, it was always that like big, hairy, audacious goal out there. The country went from 38% in 2009 when we set the goal to 55% to as of 2024 data. So that's a pretty incredible gain over that 15 years.
It is. And one thing about credentials, one thing, whether it's degrees or whether it's, short-term certifications or whatever it is, um, I know that the demands of the workforce are changing so rapidly, almost by the second and by the minute. And so how do you factor that in? I mean, years and years ago, if you went for a credential, things were pretty static. What you learned and what you had, I mean, it fit in, but that's not the case now. And so that's a great goal, but how do you come alongside that goal with the knowledge that, you know, somebody could go to school for 4 years, and by the time they get out of school, I'm not gonna say that their degree or whatever it is worthless, but it may not be completely applicable to the skills that are needed now as opposed to when they started.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest mindset shifts that we need. I mean, even a couple decades ago, you went and to a college for 4 years. You came out in 4 years from those brick buildings, and you got a job, and you're in that job until you retire. That is not the reality anymore, and we've got to stop designing education only around today's job titles because they're constantly evolving. Instead, we have to really think about in skills, capabilities that transfer across roles, transfer across industries, and that's where like short-term credentials, stackable learning, work-based experiences become even more important because they allow people to keep building on their skills as the economy changes instead of really, front loading everything as a 22-year-old graduating with a 4-year degree.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. But also, Courtney, the other thing is how do you I have a lot of questions about how you decide what to fund or what you think is a good within that thing we just talked about. How do you look at initiatives that you either support or you don't support, but you've looked at them? I know you get besieged with requests. There's just going to be another question I have. But how do you factor in the fact that some of the jobs that don't exist today will exist 6 years from now, and some of the jobs that exist today won't exist. I mean, you have we know there will be jobs that we haven't even thought of 5 years from now, but we also know that there are jobs now that may not exist 5 years from now. How do you factor that in when you're taking a look at initiatives that may or may not support?
So we don't pick winners or losers, majors, careers, anything like that. And we're not a college, we're not a policymaker. Our role is really to invest in ideas, invest in research, invest in partnerships. They're going to help the system work better. That includes, I would say, everything from supporting states to set attainment goals, to help institutions redesign programs, to make sure credentials actually deliver on value in the workforce. We're really just trying to connect education more directly to people's lives, their careers, their families, their futures, instead of picking, we're going to go all in on engineers or all in on nurses, because those things are going to change too much. And we're a national foundation. So, what is an important career in Indiana is even different than an important career in Iowa. So we have different labor markets, and so we want states, communities to determine that. At the national level, we're looking much bigger picture.
Yeah, but when you're looking at it, okay, so let me try and be more specific. When you're looking at a proposal that comes to you, isn't there some part of the foundation that's looking at it and deciding whether it's plausible or not? You're not doing that?
Oh no, absolutely, yes. I mean, we have a point of view, and we come with up with a theory of change and how we believe we're going to get to the 75%. A lot of that has to do with things around access. So we have to make sure we're still enrolling more people in post-secondary education. And we focus on everything from certificates, certifications to associate degrees and bachelor's degrees. So we need to make sure that more people are getting into these different programs. We also need to make sure that they're succeeding in them. Right now in the US, we have 43 million people that started college and for whatever reason stopped out. That is a failure of the system. So we need to fix that. We need to make sure that more people are getting out and completing a credential. And we need to make sure those credentials are valuable, that they are connected to the workforce, that people are building those durable skills that are going to allow them to be nimble and move from careers or upskill and reskill along the way as needed. So those are the kind of areas that we think about. We also use a lot of research and evaluation that we're constantly saying, what are the things that work? Where can we invest in these things? What are ideas that could be more scalable and sustainable when our funding goes away? We're not about funding things forever and ever. We want to make sure these get into policy and practice so they can continue to impact many more students, not just now, but in the future.
Yeah. With how large you are and the endowment that you are, I'm sure that the Lumina Foundation has always been one of the premier foundations when people were in this space, this educational space, and tangentially, um, probably look at, boy, that would be really great if we could get some money from the Lumina Foundation. One of the questions that I have, which, you probably haven't anticipated, and I apologize for that, but one of the questions that came to mind last night when I was thinking about this is there's a lot we can't rely as much as we did once before on government funding, and especially now in the space that we're in right now. And so my guess is, but you'll let me know if it's true, that foundations like yours are getting many, many more queries, applications, submissions, because organizations are realizing that they really can't depend on these other sources of money. Is that what's happening at Lumina?
I think that would be a fair assessment of the current situation. There are definitely many of our past partners who relied on a great deal of government funding, whether that was direct government funding or that was through another partner where they were doing a part of it. And they've lost that funding. There have been a great, deal of layoffs over the last year and with many of our partners. And so more people have, absolutely reached out to us. And then there have been a number of different grants that lost funding, maybe in their third year of a 3-year program where they just kind of had that last mile. They just needed to get across to write that final report. So those are the types of requests we're getting. But to be honest with you, even if we put all of the foundation money together across the US that focuses on higher ed, we wouldn't be able to even cover the Department of Education for more than a year. So the federal government has way more money than all the the foundations put together.
Yeah, yeah. I was just wondering how much. Yeah, the other thing, really quick, and I'll get into some of these other questions that I think you are prepared for. The other question I have is I attended a philanthropic convention gathering, whatever, several years ago. And one of the topics that came up in a breakout group was it was how foundations decide on what to fund and not to fund. And one of the topics that came up was that relationships or a relationship with an organization or a person representing an organization was important. I'm not going to say as important, but it was something that was thrown into the mix when a foundation decided whether or not it was going to fund something or not. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So I think, as you mentioned, there's so many people out there with great ideas. And so part of the challenge is how do you get into a foundation? How are you able to share your idea? And so in that way, it is good to have a relationship, but we also have open RFPs. So we get many requests through those, and those are not we don't look at those as a relationship perspective. We look at those as the good ideas and what could really take hold. So I would say, there's some truth to what you're saying, but that's not the rule.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things I wanted, hopefully, that you could explore is AI, which is having a significant impact on just about everything in society. And, your president, in a writing that he did, I think it's on your website, he suggested that we need to focus on human potential and the need to prepare people to lead alongside AI rather than, and I guess I speculated it, just submit to AI's influence. So, how does Lumina envision that can be done in the context of projects that Lumina supports?
Yeah, I like how you frame that. I Because I think the goal isn't to compete with AI. The goal is really to complement it. And so when we think about AI and higher education, which is our space in the workforce, we think about those more durable skills. And the durable skills are really those human skills. They are judgment, communication, ethical reasoning, problem solving. And AI, as we know, if you use ChatGPT or Claude, it can process information incredibly fast, but it still relies on people to ask the right questions and then make meaning of those answers. And so when we think about AI and like how that's going to impact preparing people for this moment means, a couple things happening at the same time. We need to make sure that students are having baseline digital AI literacy. And then really doubling down on those durable skills that allow people to lead, they allow them to adapt, they allow them to make decisions in complex environments, they allow them to, as we were talking about earlier, kind of move from career to career. So they're not, they can expand on what they learned in education. So to me, it's less about AI is less about training for one job and more about preparing them to navigate change really over their lifetime.
Yeah, somebody on a previous podcast talked about analytical skills as being something that humans could provide, and I think I pushed back on that because as rapidly as AI is advancing, I think one could argue at some point it might develop some pretty serious critically thinking skills and critically analysis skills. So you named a few things. What are some other things that this was really funny. I was looking out on my porch just yesterday, and I saw a whole bunch of laborers, and they were fixing up the landscape and putting down the dirt and everything they had to. And I thought to myself, probably not something that AI is going to do, and it's probably not something that's going to be done robotically soon. But what other can you think of perhaps areas, occupations, skills that you would envision AI would not infringe on to the point of actually pushing humans out?
I think that's a great question. And I'm no AI expert.
I got
Um,
that.
but but I really think AI it's not going to replace, but I think augment. It's going to take away some of those more rote tasks that people had so that they can actually do their job better. So I think of nurses. And so I'm not a nurse. you still need that person to person contact to really have a good experience. However, AI maybe can come in and do a faster job at analyzing what's going on with the body. I think teaching is another one. I think you can learn some stuff. You know, through AI, we've learned that that's how students really use AI is to learn a topic more deeper or to ask questions on topics so that they can be better prepared. But a really good teacher is still that person to person contact, that
Yeah.
person to person pushing the student more. So I think there are things like that. Those type of professions are going to be needed even more moving forward.
Lumina, as well as many others in the country, have noted that trust in the value of higher education, I'm not going to say it's on life support, but it has been waning. Um, and there are a whole bunch of promotional messages that people have put out to try and get people convinced that um, lifelong learning or learning at a higher level or learning beyond high school, as you say. I think I mentioned to you in an email we have an initiative here that's all about learning beyond high school. And people talk about, we have loans available so we can solve the problem with cost, and we have people, telling people they'll earn more money. We have a whole host of messages out there to try and convince people that continuing their learning is important. And yet, we still have whatever percentages of the population that really doesn't see the value in it. So, how do we get to the point where more people do see the value in higher learning?
So I think this is one of the most important issues that we are actually facing right now. So we have a good partnership with Gallup where we look at public perception on a number of things. And one of the things that Gallup has been doing for a number of years is polling about trust in different types of institutions across the US, whether it's small businesses, whether it's police, whether it's a Supreme Court, whether it's higher ed, and looking at how confident Americans are in each of these areas. You might imagine Supreme Court, Congress, kind of at the very bottom of where people have confidence. Small businesses, police, usually at the very top. Higher ed is actually somewhere near the top. They're in the top third of confidence. However, over the last 10 years, confidence has actually plummeted. S About 10 years ago, people had a great deal, about 60% of people had a great deal of confidence in higher education. And as of last year in 2025, just about 40% of people had a great deal of confidence in higher ed. And worse, only 30% had no confidence in higher ed. Regardless of the fact that the data show again and again it pays off. You make more money, you're healthier, you're more likely to participate in your community, you're more likely to find purpose in your life, all of these positive things. But when people think that the system is complicated, when they think it's too political, when they think it's hard to navigate, when it's too expensive, it erodes trust. And I think that's what is happening right now. And so I think, when you talk about rebuilding trust, it really comes down to how do we deliver on value? How do we make costs more transparent? How do we make sure that more people have access, not just to it, but can succeed? How do we make the outcomes more visible? We need to be much better about saying, these are the types of jobs you can get. This is how much money you will make, someone like you, and really be honest about the different pathways to and through higher education because right now it is hard to make sense of, especially if you're an outsider and no one in your family has ever participated in higher ed.
Well, I think you just touched on a really important aspect too. There's a fair amount of the workforce. I don't know what it is. You probably know better than I with all the research that you do. People who are still they still adhere to the old model, right? Which is the old model is um, I can graduate from high school. Maybe I get a cert, maybe I don't, but I certainly don't go to college and I don't really advance my learning much. And I can go get a job at the local factory down the street or wherever, and I can have a really good career and I can support my family and I can support my kids and I can have my barbecues in the backyards. Um, I think, but tell me if I'm wrong, I think that kind of attitude is still fairly prominent.
I
I think people don't wanna change is I guess is what I'm saying. They don't want it was comfortable before. It's not a very comfortable landscape right now.
Yeah, it was comfortable before. I don't think that represents the labor force now. I don't think you can have a good job and a good life without any education beyond high school. You need something. I do think we need to expand the conversation beyond traditional degrees. So we by no means say everybody needs to go get a bachelor's degree. A bachelor's degree opens more doors, but there are really good jobs you can get with a certificate or certification. But getting that valuable credential is really important and it opens up all kinds of pathways to opportunity. But I think, right now, a high school degree alone isn't going to give you those skills. It isn't going to give you those opportunity, and it's not going to allow you to be nimble. Going back to our, the beginning of our conversation, it's not going to allow you to move throughout these changing jobs like a degree would allow you to do.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, you sort of touched on it. I was gonna ask, uh, you know, where short-term certifications fit into what Lumina does in training beyond high school, what kind of importance you play on short-term, you give to short-term certifications.
Yeah. Short-term credentials, whether it's a certificate, those are usually provided by a community college or a technical institution, or a certification, those are usually provided by the workforce. Think about welding, IT, some health certifications. Again, they're really important piece of the whole post-secondary education system, the education beyond high school. They can open doors quickly, especially for working adults who don't have time or maybe resources to pursue a full degree right away. But the key is quality and value. It's like the wild west out there of certificates and certifications, and they're not all created equally. The ones that matter lead to good jobs, really good jobs. They offer opportunities for advancement, and they can ideally stack so you can continue to grow and learn from them. And so I think that's where it's important, but you have to be really careful because there's so many certificates, there's so many certifications out there, and many of them can't stand alone without, another certificate or another certification. And really, the real power in these certificates and certifications are on top of a degree. They're the ones that differentiate people. They're the ones that allow you to upskill and reskill and be more nimble in the labor force.
You know, that's interesting because this I know, there are a fair number of people in the population who have a really hard time navigating all of that. Um, there are people who don't know where to go. Um, so how does, in the one specific thing that you mentioned, how does a person know where do they go to find out whether a certification or a credential is going to do them any good?
Yeah, well, they should ask questions. So they should ask questions from the certificate or the certification holder. What is somebody like me, that looks like me, my age, where I live? What kind of jobs are there? What can I get? Ideally, these are embedded in workforce. So employers are on the other side saying we need these, and you can see a demand for them. One of the things that we're doing at Lumina is called Future Ready States. So what we're doing is we're partnering with states like Illinois, Michigan, or two of our partners, and we're usually using data to identify which short term credentials actually lead to strong wages and career mobility and which ones don't. So, really working with states to kind of help them think through this. Because, as you may imagine, there's some money coming out in the federal government thinking about these short term training types of credentials, and it's really hard to make sense of them. So, that's where some of our partnering is with these about a dozen states to really help them make sure the investment pays off for individuals, not just in earning the credential, but really in getting real opportunity on the other side.
That's great. That sounds great. A couple more questions I have before we say goodbye to each other. Um, so Lumina notes in its materials that it operates in a privileged space. I'm actually using the words that Lumina News, free from restrictions that hamper other segments of society. But some institutions, frankly, are mandated to follow certain protocols. So, how often do you find that to be an impediment to the work you support, and are there ways around that? For instance, to give you an example, there are some school systems that will, you have certain core requirements, you have certain things that you have to do. And here's a foundation like Lumina, which is really trying to look for some innovative ways that are really going to help people that a system has not done a very good job with.
Yeah. So,
Whatever.
this is definitely something we encounter. I would say that many institutions, systems are operating within real constraints, whether it's policy constraints, funding constraints, and higher ed accreditation requirements. But I also see that there's a lot of room for innovation and that people are really thinking about how can they pilot new approaches, whether it's kind of on the fringes or like going deep. Institutions are redesigning programs. They are thinking within the existing rules, like where can we improve? And really working on partnerships. So I see much more optimism. So even within some of the constraints, we're able to provide support that allows them to experiment and help surface what really works. So they may, their system may be constraining them where they can't use their funding to do it, but that's where we come in and we can provide that ability for them to test out some different models and other things to improve.
Well, along those same lines, one area that has impacted institutions that are beholden to a greater or lesser degree are, dismantling of DEI. And I personally have run into that in the work that I do. And yet Lumina keeps promoting diversity. So have you found that to be a problem? For instance, I do manage to get data from people that I've worked with, DEI data, but the initial response is a little timid, um, as you might suspect. Has that created any problem in the work that you do at Lumina?
Uh, so I would say this is complicated. It is evolving. It has been evolving, but but I would say the core idea for us hasn't changed. Our focus is on ensuring that opportunity is available to everyone, especially those who've been historically left out of the system. And I would say, even as language and policies change, the challenge remains. There are significant gaps in who has access to education and who benefits from it. One of the things that I stand behind is our Stronger Nation report. So I had mentioned we have this goal, and every year since 2009, with the attainment goal and now the credentials of value goal, we report on where we are with regards to the goal. It is an online tool right now. Google Stronger Nation, Lumina Foundation, and you can see this, all the data. And again, it's called Stronger Nation. It's at the national level, it's every state level, it's at the county level, and it's disaggregated by race, ethnicity, by age, by gender, by region. So you can see where gaps exist. And those gaps are pretty announced across race, income, geography, including parts in the Midwest. There are gaps by county. And so even as we are really thinking through places that we need to go, um, looking at that data allows us to say, this isn't like a choice that we're saying we're going to pick this group or this group. We're using the data to define where we're going to go. And I
Yeah.
stand by that data.
Yeah, yeah. And where I was coming from this is that, a person can work with a foundation that will require that data, like about the participants, the instructor who's ever involved in it, um, from an organization that is living in a new land of where that kind of data is not spoken about, right? That's there's kind of that odd conflict, right? That's
Right.
yeah. Um,
Yeah. And we don't require that data. If people can't access it, if they can't provide it, that's not something that we're going to say, well, we're not going to work with you then.
right.
Um, that's, yeah, we meet people where they are.
Um, Last, is there anything new on the horizon for Lumina that the folks that are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast that we should know about? I mean, what do you envision in the next 3 to 5 years with Lumina? Anything going to change, or is it pretty much going to operate and still have the same values that it has now?
So we are going to stick with our values. Our values are what guide us, and I think they're really important. As I mentioned, we have this new goal that we just announced. We have the baseline data and Stronger Nation. So we are really working now toward ensuring that people are getting credentials of value, that more people get the credentials, they can access them, and they get ones that are leading to good jobs and good lives. We want to make sure that people in the US have economic prosperity. I think that's really important to us. And what's really exciting about this new goal is it resonates. It resonates with people across the country. We've tested it out with red states and blue states and purple states. And leaders in those states and people on the ground really see that this is an important moment to go all in on this goal. And so we see, growing alignment across sectors, whether it's employers, higher ed, community leaders, really thinking about how to embed this goal and this work into what they are doing to help more individuals and to help their communities grow.
So, really quick, so supporting this initiative that you have, I think you said with about a dozen states where am I correct, where you're taking a look at
It's mature ready states. Yeah,
yeah, that you're taking a look at, what credentials have value, what don't. You're helping these states sort of go through all those landmines and figure out what really matters. When that's all said and done, there'll be all the rest of the states. Is there gonna be like a roadmap, whether or not Lumina supports the work or not? Is there gonna be a roadmap for how other states can do the same thing? And
absolutely.
will there be, do you think, I'm guessing there are, you will be looking at some certifications that are not state-based certifications, they're national certifications. So some of the information that you get, I assume, would be helpful to other states.
Absolutely. So everything we do is for the public good. And so whether it's, inviting more people to convenings that are part of an initiative or not part of an initiative, putting out, the research reports, the evaluation reports, the case studies so that people have access to what works and what doesn't work. I'm always careful about naming certifications again because a certification in Florida may not have any value in Indiana. And so we want to make sure that's the value of this is that states are looking at what are the credentials we need? What certificates and certifications do we need here, now and in the future, and really focusing their efforts on those. But we do want to share, we want this to scale and for more people to be able to learn from it.
Well, listen, Courtney, I appreciate your time today. I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer about what Lumina does. Fabulous foundation, but I appreciate you joining us today on the Midwest Flourish. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
That's a wrap on today's episode of the Midwest Flourish podcast. Want to dig deeper or get involved? Head to marketingthemidwest.com to explore how we can work together to empower your community to flourish. Let's keep the Midwest momentum going and shape the future of our region together.